Hi, Ghosties. I'm Macy.
And I'm Natalie.
And there is one cryptid that is known all over the world, though by different names. The Yeti, Abominable Snowman, Yowie, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, among others. His footprints have been discovered and documented by dozens, if not hundreds or even thousands of people at this point. Suspected body parts and remains have been held in temples for centuries. The calls of this creature have been heard for miles. There have been more than 10,000 eyewitness accounts of Bigfoot in the continental U.S. alone in the last 50 years, and more than 75,000 encounters logged in the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. Its image has been recorded for all to see, though there is still one problem. Definitive proof has yet to be presented to the world. He's been sought after for decades and has remained elusive. Today and next Mondays, because this is a two-parter, episode is long-awaited, and I'm excited to discuss the history and mystery of one of the most beloved creatures whose existence has yet to be proven.
Where do you fall?
I don't know. So I think...
Wait.
Okay, go ahead.
Before you tell me anything, because I've never done extensive research, as we know. You tell me all my things. I think it's real.
Okay.
I think I'm not 100% sure on what he, she, they, whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but I do think, because there have been so many sightings, that there is a Bigfoot creature.
Okay.
I don't know necessarily that it is mystical and a cryptid. It could be just this animal that is very shy.
There are several theories.
But I do believe that people are seeing something.
Yeah. You know what? I believe they're seeing something. And I'll get into my final thoughts at the end of this episode.
Okay.
So this episode is going to be History and Mystery of Bigfoot. Episode 2 on this is going to be just straight stories. I'm going to go through, and because there were a lot, and I just wanted a whole place where we could sit down and tell just Bigfoot encounters. Yes. So this is kind of history of Bigfoot, stories sprinkled in, and the next episode, all stories, maybe a couple of listener stories as well.
So if you have ever seen Bigfoot, let us know. And
Please
if you have
do.
proof, if you have a photo or a video, send it now.
Even better, send it in.
I want to see it.
Yes.
Because
I'm intrigued, and I am on the fence.
Really? After all your research?
After all my research, and I'll get into more of why at the end.
Okay, I think this is the very first time we've talked about something where I'm it is absolutely real, and you're I don't know, maybe.
I feel like you thought that way about mermaids. Is that true?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I believe in mermaids. Anyways.
That's okay. Our tea today is from a listener. It's the Kitchen Witch Aryavarta. It is a spiced chai, and I think it had orange peel in it too.
Mm-hmm.
It smells really good.
Yeah, it sounds like a spell, so.
It does.
I'm excited
I
to
don't
try
know what
it.
it means. What the word means, I mean.
I don't know, but let's go. I like it.
Very chai.
Yes. Yeah, it has that spice to it. I'm a fan. Thank you. Thank you to the person that sent us. This is this is a good one. This is very you.
Yes.
I think. Because you're a chai person.
I am very much. So let's just get into it. Bigfoot is a phenomenon and honestly an icon. There are countless shows, books, and online forums discussing encounters, as well as best practices for your own chance at coming across the creature in the wild. There's also a whole podcast dedicated to telling people stories in their own words of encounters they believe they had with Sasquatch. If you'd like to check it out, it's called Sasquatch Chronicles. They've got a lot of episodes.
Interesting.
Really interesting show. But let's start from the beginning. What is this creature? If it's even a creature at all. How did he come about? And what has so many people convinced that there is a massive bipedal being walking the woods of the continental US and beyond?
It's in different countries too, right?
All over.
Everywhere.
Something similar is everywhere. They are described almost the exact same way in most encounters in the US specifically. Large, around 7 to 8 feet tall, and weighing somewhere around 700 to 900 pounds, depending on who you talk to.
I thought we were going for a cool 250,
well,
300. I wasn't thinking it was
Some people say it's more a 400 to 600. Some people say 700 to 900. Depends on who you talk to and who's seeing it.
I thought he was the size of a large man. I wasn't thinking.
No, he's double a large man.
Oh no.
Yes. They are covered in a shaggy coat of hair in a darker shade, mostly brown or black, especially in the US and really North America. They walk upright on 2 feet, just like humans do, seem to be nocturnal, and are usually very smelly. Most people report that they are shy beings, avoiding humans as often as they can, though they have been described as, quote, leisurely and unafraid by primatologist and researcher on Bigfoot, John R. Napier. Sure. one of them.
Primatologist? So like
Studies primates.
Studies primates.
Yes.
Is Bigfoot a primate?
Some consider him to be so.
Interesting.
They are spotted mostly in heavily wooded areas, particularly in the Northwest, but you can find suspected encounters all over the U.S. Everywhere. Every state has a Bigfoot encounter. Some claim they live in caves, and others have claimed to see them climbing trees, though many believe that the ones capable of climbing must be juveniles rather than fully grown, because once you get that big, you snap a tree.
I didn't know they climbed, and I am uncomfortable with this information.
Only some have reported them in trees, so.
I don't want any reports.
They are typically described as inquisitive rather than aggressive, though many who sense one nearby or are lucky enough to see one feel as though they must flee in terror.
Oh.
So they just get that, innate
I feel that way
instinct.
all the time.
Yes, but this is, very specific to Bigfoot. Some believe they might be pescatarian, though others claim they will eat the occasional deer, rodent, and other woodland creatures as they need to.
Okay.
So there's full lore here.
Yeah.
There are many theories as to what this thing in the woods could be, and we will get to that. But what I find most fascinating about the legend and lore is the persistence for decades, as well as the claims made by people all over the world, as we said, from all cultural backgrounds and walks of life, of having seen something strange in the wild. There have been stories of, quote, wild men for as long as there is documented history. They were these humanoid figures, but not quite regular people, who would steal livestock and food from people's farms and villages. They were always described as hairy, smelly, and other. Just, very not like us. They would throw stones, fight with locals, and some believe they could even be cannibals, depending on the story, really. Now, maybe these stories are just ways for people to discuss the fear we have as humans of the wild parts of ourselves, or ruminating on what we used to be, what we descended from. And we're not going to get into the nuances of this view because there is a lot that could be said about othering and prejudice. So
yeah,
maybe some of these stories are just, they were the other in a society, in a culture. So we won't get into that, but that is very real.
Suddenly, I don't like this story.
Sorry, we're moving
sad.
past that. Some skeptics believe Bigfoot might just be a more modern wild man legend. But as I mentioned, there are recorded sightings of something similar all over the world for centuries at this point. And you know what? What I found most interesting, and what I find most interesting about the paranormal in general, all of these stories that we tell, is that we as people have so much more in common than what divides us.
Oh, yeah.
So much. Our legends from all parts of the world really link us together, and it makes us, the world feels so much smaller. And I feel such a sense of togetherness with people. We are one,
Bigfoot's making you feel that way?
It did. It did. Among other things.
I like that.
Yeah, and that's one thing I've always liked about America, because our culture is built by bringing people's stories together and cultures together, and we are from all over the world in one place.
Quite literally, yes, because it's not America without every other culture ever in the world.
Yes, the melting pot we all learned about in literal third grade if you went to school in America.
Yeehaw. Honestly.
Throw my cowboy hat in the air.
Eagle screech, yeah.
There will always be the few who choose division and hate, but there's no place for that here. And legends and stories like these are a good way to do that. Just throwing that out there for everyone.
You know what? Hell yeah.
So just wanted to throw that out there. Bigfoot brought me to this conclusion here. I mean, I've always had that ideal, but you know what I mean.
That's a crazy take on Bigfoot, but I like it.
There is the Alma in the mountains of Central Asia, particularly the Altai Mountains and the Tian Shan Ranges. German traveler Johann Schilterberger described a wild people who were supposed to live here in the 1400s. Quote, in the Tian Shan Mountains themselves live a wild people who have nothing in common with other human beings. A pelt covers the entire body of these creatures. They run around in the hills like animals and eat foliage and grass and whatever else they can find, unquote.
I'm kind of feeling sad.
That they're an other?
Yeah, I didn't know.
The thing is, they might just be
an animal thing?
Yeah.
Well, what if they are just a different type of human and we've just been Bigfoot, but it's just dang.
We evolved from one branch of the Neanderthal, whatever.
And they
were evolved in another direction. Okay, well, this has turned sad, and I didn't mean it to be.
Very emotional for Bigfoot. Okay,
justice for Bigfoot.
Honestly, yeah, let's just be... I'm too emotional today. Let's just go.
There are even more cryptids that I want to mention that resemble our own Bigfoot before our discussion moves back here to the States. They all have their own origins and lore, but since our focus is on Bigfoot today, we can always just return to some of these later because there are some crazy stories with some of these. But we'll just save these for another day. Just put a pin in this. There is the Yeren of the Hubei province in China, a hairy hominid that lives in the remote forests and mountains. The Nandi bear that lives in East Africa, particularly the forests of Kenya, which is described as a hulking creature, some have said is ferocious and stands on its hind legs as people do. The Hibagon of the Hibayama Mountains in Hiroshima, Japan, is a bit shorter than some of the others on this list, but has large feet and is covered in hair resembling a gorilla or ape of some kind. The Mapinguari of central Brazil is particularly frightening cryptid, like really kind of scary, or some would even describe it as more of a spirit of the Amazon. There is also the Orang Pendek of the Kerinci Semblat National Park in Sumatra, Indonesia, and on the nearby island of Borneo, there were reports of, quote, wild men in the rainforests, which, side note, is one of the oldest rainforests at 130 million years old, by the way.
Whoa.
It's like one of the biggest islands and has like one of the oldest rainforests in the world.
I'd love to know what's in there.
Well, one thing is orangutans, so
Yes.
they actually have orangutans, so some people think that maybe some of the stories were actually these creatures.
Probably. Yeah,
Yeah.
probably.
Which, did you know, orangutan is in Indonesia, like, actually means like man of the forest.
Okay. I'm feeling very, like, you're taking me everywhere right now. I was like,
It is kind of all over the place.
feeling sympathy for Bigfoot, and now I'm like, well, maybe it's just a monkey and we're being crazy, and
Who knows?
I don't know what's going on.
This episode reflects my feelings too, because I don't know.
I don't know either.
Lastly, I'll quickly mention the Yowie in Australia. There have been over 3,000 distinct sightings in the Blue Mountains area west of Sydney just in the last few decades. It is said to live in the outback, particularly in the eastern states, and is described similarly to our own Bigfoot at anywhere from 5 to 11 feet, covered in hair with extremely long arms. The name comes from the Aboriginal word Yowie, which means something like dream spirit, something akin to that. The Aboriginals had their own legends of hairy men who roamed the wilds well before colonization, and many of these stories are incredibly similar to Bigfoot sightings. One of our listeners, Sorry, shout out Sorry, even sent us a link to a Facebook group filled with people reporting these sightings. It was really cool.
Sorry's been a day one.
She has.
Yeah.
There are a few of you out there. We still see you. We appreciate you.
We do.
So those are just some of the names for some of the creatures that resemble Bigfoot and have similarities to Bigfoot.
It really is insane that it's everywhere.
Yes, that's one of the reasons why I am on the fence.
Yeah, I previously thought it was just kind of like a US thing or like a North American thing, and so I'm very shocked to find this out.
Well, there is one that I know you know about. And it was in the Himalayas.
The Abominable Snowman.
The Abominable Snowman. The Yeti, cryptid widely known in the Himalayan mountains. So in southern Asia or
In Monsters,
central
Inc.
southern Asia. Yes, welcome to the Himalayas.
Yes, that's the only thing I know.
Yes, so it's a similar creature. It's been known to traverse the Himalayan mountains, which you know is like Nepal, Tibet, India, Pakistan, Bhutan, all of those countries right there.
Mm-hmm.
There's also reports of something similar in Russia as well.
Oh.
So like it goes all the way up into the mountains in like Siberia and stuff over there. So I don't know, just throwing that out there, but I didn't do too much research. There was a lot, guys. There was a lot. Okay, anyway. So the word Yeti means something like man thing of the snows. We actually get the name Abominable Snowman from a mistranslation for the creature many years ago. In 1921, a journalist named Henry Newman was putting a piece together about a Mount Everest expedition that had just been undertaken by British explorers led by Lieutenant Colonel C.K. Howardbury. While there, the men had discovered very large and unusual footprints on the mountainside. Their guide told them that those prints belonged to the Meto Kongmi, which roughly translate to man-bear snowman, something like that. While translating the word, Newman read Meto as Mech, getting the name Filthy Snowman, but he thought the word abominable sounded better for his paper. And it seems to do exactly what he intended, because the name catches on and leads to many becoming extremely interested in the wild and elusive creature of the treacherous mountain. Though popularity in the West begins around this point for the Abominable Snowman, so it was kind of around the early 1900s when like people in the West started really getting interested in this. The people of Nepal and surrounding communities have known of this cryptid animal spirit creature for many years before. Described as a large, hairy, sometimes reddish-brown in color and other times gray, the creature is known far and wide to the Sherpas and other people living near its habitat. It's said to typically stand around 6 to 8 feet and weigh somewhere between 200 and 400 pounds. So it's just like a very, very large, like man-shaped thing. It is forbidden to kill the Yeti and is said by some to have once been very common in the region until it was killed off by locals to prevent them from raiding their crops. So that's kind of a legend
Mhm.
of the area. It exists in many legends and folklore of the area and is seen by some as a sign of danger. There is a story that says Alexander the Great demanded to see a Yeti after he conquered the Indus Valley in 326 BC. He was unsuccessful at viewing one himself because the locals told him that it could only survive in the high altitudes that it was typically seen. They said, no, we can't bring one down here because it can't survive in this low altitude. So sorry, dude.
Also, like, you're demanding, bring me the thing. Why don't you just go see it?
Yeah, climb the mountain
go.
yourself. There have been stories forever told about the creature by those living in communities all around the mountain. Buddhist monks have written of the creature for centuries, and its tracks have astounded many. There have been documented discoveries of large footprints in the snow and other traces of the creature well before the 1921 British expedition. So before it was written about in Britain, people have known and documented these things. One of the first big discoveries that really drummed up interest in the region and eventually led to many different countries sending out their own explorers to the area in search of the creature was brought on by Eric Shipton. So after this expedition that Eric Shipton goes on, people from around the world were sending explorers of their own to go search the mountains and climb the mountains.
See, and this is why I believe in it so, fully. Because why are we all acting like this if there's not some kind of, truth to it?
Yes, I get you. I feel you. He was one of the first to photograph its footprints in the snow for all to see, and it led to a boom in interest once again in the 1950s with more than just secondhand accounts of this phenomenon. So he took photographs and they were dispersed and people were like, what is that? We need to find it.
Mm-hmm.
While traversing the Menlung Basin in 1951, Eric Shipton came across a trail of fairly large footprints. They were 12 to 13 inches long at 19,000 feet up. Tom Bourdillon, a famous mountaineer of the times, was with Shipton on his expedition and photographed the prints, sending them off to a contemporary with the note, quote, "Here are the footprint photos. We came across them on a high pass on the Nepal-Tibet watershed during the 1951 Everest expeditions. They seem to have come over a secondary pass at about 19,500 feet down to 19,000 feet, where we first saw them, and then went down the glacier. We followed them for the better part of a mile. What it is, I don't know, but I am quite clear that it is no animal known to live in the Himalaya and that it is big."
That just gave me a chill. That it's big. That
It's
just feels
hulking.
ominous.
Just the depth in which it pressed into the snow and how large the footprints are. They were like, this has got to be a huge creature.
That's scary.
Yeah, could you imagine? You're out there on a first of its kind expedition. No one you know has ever explored the mountainside like this. And you're like, what is that? What is out there?
Would you ever climb a mountain? Like a snowy mountain?
Yeah.
You would?
One day.
That's
okay, probably not, but I want to.
If the opportunity arose and you could go.
If I could train and go, yeah. Maybe not Mount Everest.
That's one thing. See, it's climbing mountains and running marathons. I love the people that do it. I have no interest ever in my soul to do something like that.
I want to. The possibility of discovering a new creature never before captured by humans on record was appealing to many explorers. It was thought that even Sir Edmund Hillary, the first British explorer to ascend Mount Everest by Tenzing Norgay, spotted tracks. But really, I think what they figured out later is that it was some kind of known animal like a bear, and the tracks had melted a little bit to expand them and make them bigger. That's what they decided later, but who knows?
I mean, it makes sense.
But it has supposedly been spotted on more than one occasion. So tracks and the Yeti.
Mm-hmm.
One written in the book Still Living, Yeti, Sasquatch, and the Neanderthal Enigma in 1983, Myra Shackley wrote the description of a sighting all the way back in 1942 by hikers who claimed to see, quote, 2 black specks moving across the snow about a quarter mile below them. So this was even before Eric Shipton went here. Quote, "The height was not much less than 8 feet. The heads were described as squarish, and the ears must lie close to the skull because there was no projection from the silhouette against the snow. The shoulders sloped sharply down to a powerful chest, covered by reddish-brown hair, which formed a close body fur mixed with long, straight hairs hanging downward," unquote. And another witness who claimed to see a creature, quote, "about the size and build of a small man, the head covered with long hair, but the face and chest not very hairy at all, reddish-brown in color and bipedal. It was busy grubbing up roots and occasionally emitted a loud, high-pitched cry," unquote.
High-pitched?
Yeah.
I was thinking it was like a
Like
deep
a scream.
Oh, I was imagining like a deep, roaring, loud sound.
Like more like Chewbacca.
Yes, that's literally exactly what I was thinking.
What I think too. But
high pitched.
Some people say it's depends on where it is.
Interesting.
Depends on who's seeing it. But yes, some people say it's like a yell. Some people say it's like a growl, like a, and we'll get into more of like details on Bigfoot particularly, but yeah. But there is still more. There have been some who claim to have captured more physical evidence of the creature within the mountains. Enter the Pangboche Hand. A monastery in Pangboche held a set of intriguing artifacts for many years until in 1957, when a man from Texas named Tom Slick funded an American expedition to Nepal on the hunt for the Yeti. He was obviously unsuccessful in his endeavors. As you can see today, we do not have the Yeti, but commissioned brothers Peter and Brian Byrne to continue on for what ultimately was a 3-year endeavor. As they did so, they came across the monks along a trail toward Mount Everest and overheard that they claimed to have the remains of the creature on hand in their monastery, or some pieces of remains.
What?
The monks claimed to have the skull and a skull cap and hand of the beast on display, like hidden within their monastery. Quoted from Peter Byrne himself, "The find of what looked to me like a partially mummified primate hand, black and glistening from the oily smoke of the temple lamps, was very exciting, and I immediately sent a runner off to India with a cable to Tom Slick, telling him all about it." So I think it was, he came across and like he was talking to a janitor inside the temple, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we got this pretty cool hand if you want to see it." And eventually, yeah, he went and saw it, and he was like, "Okay, I got to tell my guy because this gotta be proof, right?" Days later, Slick replied telling Peter that he needed to bring the hand back to England so that they could examine it under, quote, controlled conditions, and British primatologist Dr. Osmond Hill could determine its authenticity. In Peter's words, other sources make this out to be much more nefarious than his own words, so just keep that in mind. Some say that he just like outright stole it. It was like a whole heist.
It sounds nefarious.
But Peter says this is what happened. They would not allow the men to borrow the hand for a study, but because they didn't want the hand to leave the temple. They thought maybe if the hand left the temple in full, like something bad would happen. They felt it as it was like luck to the temple and like the spirits. Peter countered with the idea of taking just one finger for study, and after a few days, they agreed. Except they told him that they, one, have to have something to replace the finger, like a replica of some kind, and two, he would have to make a substantial contribution for the upkeep of their temple. Because sometimes people would pay to see it.
Yeah.
And they're like they're a small little temple on the side of a mountain. Like
they need the money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
After meeting with several people in London and obtaining a human hand of unknown origin, so don't ask me how he got this, Peter returned to the monastery and made the trade. So like Dr. Osmond Hill gave him the hand. I have no clue. There's no mention of where he got the hand. So maybe an artifact of some kind. I'd like to hope.
You said it sounds nefarious. This is evil.
A human finger for the suspected finger of a Yeti. They made a donation of 10,000 rupees, which was about $160 to the temple, and wired the human finger into place with the other bones. And $160 at that point was like it was a lot for them. Like I think he said the average like income for a full year was something like $15 for the area.
Whoa.
So like this is a very decent amount of money for the times.
Yeah.
But the next step was to find a way to smuggle this body part to London. Peter made his way to Calcutta and met with the actor Jimmy Stewart and his wife Gloria to give them the finger so that they could smuggle it via Mrs. Stewart's lingerie case. So I don't know their connections, but Slick was like, "Hey, meet my buddy Jimmy Stewart in Calcutta. Give him the finger. They'll wrap it up and they'll bring it back to London with them on their way home." Very strange. Actually, in the story that Peter told, Mrs. Stewart left her bag in the hotel, and she was like,
finger?
"Oh no, yeah," because it was like wrapped, like hidden within her like undergarments and stuff. She left that bag in the hotel in Calcutta, and they were like, "How are we gonna get, like, customs are gonna get us?" Eventually, the hotel called, and they're like, "Yes, ma'am, we found it." They sent British customs to like give them the bag, and it was still locked. And she was like, "You didn't go through my bag?" Like, "Oh, of course, we would never go through a lady's things like that." So.
I mean, cool.
So the finger survived, but still weird.
This is very strange.
Very, very weird. It is stated by Peter that Dr. Osmond Hill examined the finger and, given the fact that DNA comparison was not a thing at that time, found no definitive answers. So some sources said that he said, yes, this is human, or this is some kind of animal. And some sources say that he wasn't able to determine whether it was, like, it wasn't a human. It wasn't anything he's ever known.
Because at the time, what technology did you really have to determine that?
Just observation.
I was supposed to just looking at
Comparison, yeah.
That's interesting.
No DNA at that time was able to use to find these out. Dr. Hill passed shortly after, and the whereabouts of the finger were unknown. So after this, many people had begun to see the hand and scalp. So like it was kind of getting around. They're like, Peter found a hand. We need to go find this hand too. So they would go in for a fee, see this hand with now a finger bone attached to it, and people looking for proof came to the monastery and said, this is a person. Like, this
Uh-huh.
has to be human. But is that because it was replaced with a human finger? Or is it because it's not? It's just like a bunch of random bones put together. That is one question. So the long lost finger was believed to be found years later in the Hunterian Museum of the Royal College of Surgeons, who noted that they received the item as part of a bequest by Dr. Hill after he passed. In 2011, tests were done by the Royal Zoology Society of Scotland on the finger, and DNA found it to be human.
Okay.
This did not deter a search for the creature, though. There have remained reported sightings of the creature itself, as well as casts of footprints made and stories told. And it seems that the Yeti fever people had for the Himalayas made its way across the ocean to the Americas, where in the mid-1900s, a whirlwind of encounters and stories seemed to latch onto the mainstream and send people flocking to the Northwest. So it kind of all started in the Himalayas.
With the Yeti.
With the Yeti. The popularity.
Mhm.
Stories like this have existed forever, but the popularity grew, starting with British explorers and the Yeti, and stories started to spread. Or so it seemed from my research.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't there, so. A very large and imposing creature was starting to make its way to the mainstream in America, though it had been a part of some legends and lore for many, many years prior. Native tribes in the area, and really all over North America, so literally everywhere, have their own tales of a tall, hairy creature who lives in the wild. So just like most native tribes have their own stories about like little people, fairies, that kind of thing, a lot of them have their own stories about hairy, wild creature men things. We actually supposedly get the word Sasquatch from the Sta'alis people's word Saskets in reference to the wild hairy men. There are different legends of the bipedal beasts for First Nation tribes all down the west coast from Canada into America. Some even consider the creature or creatures with reverence in their culture, with sightings of these creatures being spiritually significant about the land and what's going on in society at the time. The Sta'alis people believe Sasquatch to be a caretaker of the wilderness and sacred to many coastal tribes, not just them. But we'll get more into that a little bit later. First, I want to talk about the popularization of Bigfoot in the region of North America. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, same thing. North American settlers began reporting sightings along the west coast in the late 1800s and all through the 1900s. Like in Nepal, they too would find footprints and try to capture photo evidence for the creature. In similar fashion to the discovery of footprints in the Himalayas, British explorer David Thompson was traversing the Canadian wilderness in the early 1800s when he came across footprints that couldn't possibly come from another human and looked so dissimilar to any animal tracks he had seen thus far. It was January 7th, 1811, and Thompson was trekking through the snow in what is known today as Jasper National Park, somewhere near the region of Mount Athabasca. He writes in his journal of a curious incident. Quote, January 7, 1811. Continuing our journey in the afternoon, we came on the track of a large animal, the snow about 6 inches deep on the ice. I measured it. 4 large toes, each of 4 inches in length, to each a short claw. The ball of the foot sunk 3 inches lower than the toes. The hinder part of the foot did not mark well. The length 14 inches by 8 inches in breadth, walking from north to south, and having passed about 6 hours. We were in no humor to follow him. The men and Indians would have it be a young mammoth, and I held it to be the track of a large old grizzled bear. Yet the shortness of the nails, the ball of the foot, and its great size was not that of a bear, otherwise that of a very large old bear, his claws worn away. He continued to be astounded by his findings even later, writing in his narrative, so this was years later. I now recur that what I have already noticed in the earlier part of last winter, when proceeding up the Athabasca River to cross the mountains in company with men and 4 hunters on one of the channels of the river, we came to the track of a large animal, which measured 14 inches in length by 8 inches in breadth by a tape line. As the snow was about 6 inches in depth and track as well defined, and we could see it for a full 100 yards from us, this animal was proceeding from north to south. We did not attempt to follow it. We had no time for it, and the hunters, eager as they were to follow and shoot every animal, made no attempt to follow this beast. For what could the balls of our fowling guns do against such an animal? Report from old times had made the head branches of this river and the mountains in the vicinity the abode of one or more very large animals, to which I never appeared to give credence. For these reports appeared to arise from the fondness for the marvelous so common to mankind. But the sight of the tracks of that large beast staggered me, and I often thought of it, yet never could bring myself to believe such an animal existed, but thought it might be the track of some monster bear.
I am so upset that they didn't follow it.
Well, they were like, whatever made this, we want no part of it.
But you're out there to like explore or hunt or whatever they're doing. Follow it.
Yeah.
I would.
I think they were just trying to like track and like map the area of like British Columbia and stuff.
Yeah. But I need some proof. Show
I know.
me the proof.
Selfishly, yes, I would like to them have followed it.
Same.
But if they did, who knows if
We
they
might
would
not
be
even
here.
hear for them. So I personally would like to believe, though, that Bigfoot, whatever it is not violent. Because if it was,
Speaking of which,
oh, really?
continue.
But okay, sorry. Because if it was, it would be like a big thing that like, oh, someone got attacked. We're finding people just like ripped apart, but we're not. Or are we?
So you think.
Oh no.
We aren't right now, like not lately, but.
Oh no.
So I said part 2 is going to be mostly Bigfoot stories, so we won't dive too much into those right now, but I did want to give a few more examples that led to the phenomenon that is Bigfoot today. One such story actually appeared in Teddy Roosevelt's book, The Wilderness Hunter, in 1890. He told of a man he met in his travels who had a frightening tale of a brush with a massive creature while setting traps in Montana. It is one of the very few violent stories with the entity known as Bigfoot and is particularly chilling. I'll go ahead and read that excerpt of the part of the book for you. It was told by a grizzled, weather-beaten old mountain hunter named Bauman, who was born and had passed all his life on the frontier. He must have believed what he said, for he could hardly repress a shudder at certain points of his tale. But he was of German ancestry and in childhood had doubtless been saturated with all kinds of ghost and goblin lore. When the event occurred, Bauman was still a young man and was trapping with a partner among the mountains dividing the fork of the Salmon from the head of Wisdom River. Not having had much luck, he and his partner determined to go up into a particularly wild and lonely pass through which ran a small stream said to contain many beavers. The pass had an evil reputation because the year before, a solitary hunter who had wandered into it was slain, seemingly by a wild beast, the half-eaten remains being afterwards found by some mining prospectors who had passed his camp only the night before. The memory of this event, however, weighed very lightly with the two trappers, who were as adventurous and hardy as others of their kind. They took their 2 lean mountain ponies to the foot of the pass, where they left them in an open beaver meadow, the rocky timber-clad ground being from there onward impracticable for horses. They then struck out on foot through the vast gloomy forest, and in about 4 hours reached a little open glade where they concluded to camp, as signs of game were plenty. There was still an hour or 2 of daylight left, and after building a brush lean-to and throwing down the opening their packs, they started upstream. At dusk, they again reached camp. They were surprised to find that during their absence, something, apparently a bear, had visited camp and had rummaged about among their things, scattering the contents of their packs and in sheer wantonness, destroying their lean-to. The footprints of the beast were quite plain, but at first they paid no particular heed to them, busying themselves with rebuilding the lean-to, laying out their beds and stores, and lighting the fire. While Bauman was making ready supper, it being already dark, his companion began to examine the tracks more closely, and soon took a brand from the fire to follow them up, where the intruder had walked along a game trail after leaving the camp. When the brand flickered out, he returned and took another, repeating this inspection of the footprints very closely. Coming back to the fire, he stood by it a minute or 2, peering out into the darkness, and suddenly remarked, "Bauman, that bear has been walking on 2 legs. Bauman laughed at this, but his partner insisted that he was right, and upon again examining the tracks with a torch, they certainly did seem to be made by but 2 paws or feet. However, it was too dark to make sure. After discussing whether the footprints could possibly be those of a human being, and coming to the conclusion that they could not be, the 2 men rolled up in their blankets and went to sleep under the lean-to. At midnight, Bauman was awakened by some noise and sat up in his blankets. As he did so, his nostrils were struck by a strong, wild beast odor, and he caught the loom of a great body in the darkness at the mouth of the lean-to. Grasping his rifle, he fired at the vague, threatening shadow, but he must have missed, for immediately afterwards he heard the smashing of underwood as the thing, whatever it was, rushed off into the impenetrable blackness of the forest and the night. After this, the 2 men slept but little, sitting up by the rekindled fire, but they heard nothing more. In the morning, they started out to look at the few traps they had set the previous evening and put out new ones. By an unspoken agreement, they kept together all day and returned to the camp towards evening. On nearing it, they saw, hardly to their astonishment, that the lean-to had again been torn down. The visitors of the preceding day had returned, and in wanton malice had tossed about their camp kit and bedding and destroyed the shanty. The ground was marked up by its tracks, and on leaving the camp it had gone along the soft earth by the brook. The footprints were as plain if on snow, and after a careful scrutiny of the trail, it certainly did seem as if, whatever the thing was, it had walked off on but 2 legs.
What if it's just like a person that lives out there and doesn't want them in their area? Or is it
like
too
someone
big?
that just like lives in a cave or something?
Yeah, or just like a tribe of people that live there and they're like, hey, why do y'all keep trying to set up camp in my area? Like, get out.
The men, thoroughly uneasy, gathered a great heap of dead logs and kept up a roaring fire throughout the night, one or the other sitting on guard most of the time. About midnight, the thing came down through the forest opposite, across the brook, and stayed there on the hillside for nearly an hour. They could hear the branches crackle as it moved about, and several times it uttered a harsh, grating, long-drawn moan, a very sinister sound. Yet it did not venture near the fire. In the morning, the two trappers, after discussing the strange events of the last 36 hours, decided that they would shoulder their packs and leave the valley that afternoon. They were the more ready to do this because, in spite of seeing a good deal of game sign, they had caught very little fur. However, it was necessary first to go along the line of their traps and gather them, and this they started out to do. All the morning they kept together, picking up trap after trap, each one empty. On first leaving camp, they had the disagreeable sensation of being followed. In the dense spruce thickets, they occasionally heard a branch snap after they had passed. And now and then, there were slight rustling noises among the small pines to one side of them. At noon, they were back within a couple of miles of camp. In the high, bright sunlight, their fears seemed absurd to the two armed men, accustomed as they were, through long years of lonely wandering in the wilderness, to face every kind of danger from man, brute, or element. There were still 3 beaver traps to collect from a little pond in a wide ravine nearby. Bauman volunteered to gather these and bring them in, while his companion went ahead to camp and made ready the packs. On reaching the pond, Bauman found 3 beavers in the traps, one of which had been pulled loose and carried into a beaver house. He took several hours in securing and preparing the beaver, and when he started homeward, he marked, with some uneasiness, how low the sun was getting. As he hurried toward camp, under the tall trees, the silence and desolation of the forest waited on him. His feet made no sound on the pine needles, and the slanting sun rays, striking through among the straight trunks, made a gray twilight in which objects at a distance glimmered indistinctly. There was nothing to break the gloomy stillness which, when there is no breeze, always broods over those somber primeval forests. At last he came to the edge of the little glade where the camp lay and shouted as he approached it, but got no answer. The campfire had gone out, though the thin blue smoke was still curling upwards. Near it lay the packs, wrapped and arranged. At first, Bauman could see nobody, nor did he receive an answer to his call. Stepping forward, he again shouted, and as he did so, his eye fell on the body of his friend, stretched beside the trunk of a great fallen spruce. Rushing toward it, the horrified trapper found that the body was still warm, but that the neck was broken, while there were 4 great fang marks in the throat. The footprints of the unknown beast creature, printed deep in the soft soil, told the whole story. The unfortunate man, having finished his packing, had sat down on the spruce log, with his face to the fire, and his back to the dense woods, to wait for his companion. While thus waiting, his monstrous assailant, which must have been lurking in the woods, waited for a chance to catch one of the adventurers unprepared, came silently up from behind, walking with long, noiseless steps, and seemingly still on 2 legs. Evidently unheard, it reached the man and broke his neck by wrenching his head back with its forepaws, while it buried its teeth in his throat. It had not eaten the body, but apparently had romped, and gamboled around in uncouth, ferocious glee, occasionally rolling over and over it, and had then fled back into the soundless depths of the wood. Bauman, utterly unnerved, and believing that the creature with which he had to deal was something either half human or half devil, some great goblin beast, abandoned everything but his rifle and struck off at speed down the pass, not halting until he reached the beaver meadows where the hobbled ponies were still grazing. Mounting, he rode onward through the night until beyond reach of pursuit.
I didn't know we were doing the murderous Bigfoot episode, but do you think it is like a Bigfoot creature, or is it just some kind of animal?
Like a bear of some kind?
Yeah.
I don't know. I
think
think
bear.
It does, especially like the biting and the rolling around and stuff. But like we know anything about bears. I've never met a bear in my life. So what I think is, if it is a Bigfoot, if Bigfoot exists, then they're like people where they all have different personalities. And like maybe there's one loner Bigfoot out there that like doesn't like people impeding on his territory. Or maybe it's like a mama Bigfoot who has babies in the area, like a bear.
That's true.
And they're like in its home. I don't know. It depends. It depends on what Bigfoot is.
I like the idea of there being like Bigfoot people
like
or
society.
Things. And it's like, yeah, there's like different personalities and stuff. Kind of into it. Yeah, I think that's cool.
Well, accounts of violence from Sasquatch/Bigfoot are very rare, and the few stories we do have such a negative encounter seem to have happened even before the Bigfoot craze began in the 50s. So like that one was from before the 1890s sometime. It didn't give a date from what I saw. But another such story comes from 5 gold prospectors on Mount St. Helens in Washington in 1924. So again, before the 50s, before kind of the craze began here in America. It was widely reported in the Oregon press and was something of interest for many years. Fred Beck, Gabe Lefevre, John Peterson, Marion Smith and Smith's son Ray were about 8 miles from Spirit Lake when they were ambushed by 4, quote, gorilla men. These creatures were standing upright, quote, covered with long black hair and looked to weigh 400 pounds. The man described them as large, with feet that had 4 short and stubby toes, as well as ears about 4 inches long that stood straight up on their heads. In fear, one of the men fired at the creatures with his rifle, hitting one of them off of the cliff. So it hit and it fell off the cliff. They went back to their cabin shortly after that, thinking that they had scared them off for good. So they disappeared. They didn't see them anymore.
You killed one of them.
But in the middle of the night, they returned. This time, they began to throw large rocks at the cabin, shaking it at its foundations and tearing a hole through the roof. Rocks began to fall in on the men, several striking back, one of which knocked him unconscious for almost 2 hours.
Whoa.
So their story says.
Well, I mean, if they are like a Bigfoot society, you killed one of their own. So like they gotta like come
Get
at
back?
you. Yeah.
Yes. The men were eventually able to escape at dawn and were so spooked that they didn't tell anyone for a little bit. But eventually, word did get out of the men's encounter and an investigation began by the U.S. Forest Service to find any answers. Rangers were unable to find any evidence to the claims made outside of some 14-inch prints nearby after the incident. I think it was sometime after the incident. They found in the general area some prints. It was decided to be a prank and the case was closed.
It's an interesting prank, but okay.
Well, it wasn't until 1982 when a retired logger from Toledo claimed to be the source of at least a little of the prospector's claims. Rant Mullins, who was 86 in 1982 at the time of this report, said that he and his uncle were returning from a fishing trip in the area of Mount St. Helens in 1924 when they decided to roll rocks toward the men on their way out, just kind of like freak them out a little. Years later, Mullins continued on with the creation of the legend by creating giant feet out of wood and stomping them around the river. So he says.
Yeah, I could see someone doing that though.
Well, they were doing with they were making molds.
Yeah.
to print.
And I could see someone doing that, just like trolling.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
This wasn't the last publicized encounter of the 20s in Northeast. In 1929, author J.W. Burns covered Sasquatch in an edition of Maclean's magazine from a community of natives titled Introducing BC's Hairy Giants. He told the stories of several men he had befriended while visiting their village. One man named Peter claimed that in 1909 he was walking along the foot of the mountain, only a mile from the Chehalis Reserve, when he heard a noise that sounded like a grunt close by. He found what looked to be a massive bear on a boulder only 20 to 30 feet away from him. So he raised his rifle and pointed it in its direction, when the creature shocked him. It stood on 2 legs and let out a scream. Peter claimed that this creature was a giant of a man, no less than 6.5 feet tall, and was covered head to toe in fur. The creature leapt from the boulder and chased after Peter as he fled through the brush back toward the river.
Oh my god!
The figure was getting closer and closer to Peter as he ran for his life before he jumped into his boat on the river and made it across. Surprisingly, the creature followed him into the water, the current not hardly phasing the beast as it crossed the riverbank. So it just kept going through the river, through the racing river.
I didn't know they could swim.
Peter finally made it home, still looking over his shoulder and sickened with fear. And his wife and children were still inside, so he barricaded the door with all that he had, locked it, bolted, shoved everything he could, and stood ready with his rifle to defend his home. It was 20 minutes later when Peter could hear the sounds of the beast approaching. He claimed it sounded like the trampling of a horse, and through a crack in the wall, he could see the giant. He claimed the creature had to be twice the bulk of the average man, but aside from his size and the hair, he looked just like a man, very large and hairy. The creature pushed toward the wall of his home, shaking the timbers as he prowled around the home looking for a way in. He eventually left, finding no way to get inside, and Peter found his tracks in the mud around his home. They measured 22 inches in length at this time.
Good lord. What were we at? We were at 14 and now we're jumping in 22?
Yes, so it varies. Peter did see the giant once more that winter. It chased him again, but did not pursue him for as long as it did previously. It's then that he told the elders in his village. They nodded their heads and shrugged their shoulders, for they had heard of a similar encounter before. A man named Paul had been chased in terror by what they believed to be the same creature. They believed the creature lived in the tunnels and caves of the mountain. So Peter's story kind of went on. Then early in spring of the following year, another man and myself were bear hunting near the place where I first met him. On this occasion, we ran into 2 of these giants. They were sitting on the ground. At first, we thought they were old tree stumps, but when we were within 50 feet or so, they suddenly stood up and we came to an immediate stop. Both were nude. We were close enough to know that they were man and woman. The woman was the smaller of the 2, but neither of them as big or fierce looking as the gent who chased me. We ran home, but they did not follow us.
So it's a whole family of them
There's possibly a whole community of them near the river where they live. There was another very strange story told of a man who claimed to speak of the giant creature. So if you're interested, we can put the link in the description to this little article. It's very strange, very cool, very interesting. I highly recommend. So the 1950s proved a very popular time worldwide for the cryptid. René de Hinden, one of Canada's best-known Sasquatch researchers, moved to Canada from Switzerland and began his investigation into the creature. So he arrived to British Columbia in 1953, and he began immediately to hear stories of the creature and took it upon himself to start collecting those stories and any evidence he could find. So he got there and was like, what are you talking about? I gotta find this guy, and just collected stories for basically the rest of his life. He is said to have collected hundreds of footprint casts and interviewed hundreds of witnesses along the coast. Around the same time, journalist John Green began investigating himself and writing about the creature as well. It seems that there were scattered reports in the news of sightings of strange happenings related to the wild man before then, but in the 50s is when it all began to coalesce into a popular discussion. So like, if you look back in like records, you could see like 1921, there's this entry in a magazine, and like it just kind of scattered about. The 50s is just when people like
said,
who is Bigfoot?
Yeah.
Or who is Sasquatch? Mm-hmm. In 1958, a letter was written to the Humboldt Times about the experiences of several loggers in Northern California. Andrew Genzoli, the reporter at the time, wrote, quote, maybe we have a relative of the Abominable Snowman of the Himalayas, and it seems many agreed. Readers were enthralled by the stories, and it led to several follow-up articles and a fascination with the region's own cryptid. From this incident, Bigfoot got his name. On Monday, August 27th, 1958, a man named Jerry Crew arrived at his worksite on Bluff Creek Road in Northern California. He was a logger working with the Wallace Brothers Logging Company and the Granite Logging Company. As he got out of his truck and climbed up into this piece of heavy equipment that he used, he noticed massive footprints in the dirt. Like, he looked down and he's like, what is that? The ground had been leveled, but there were these distinct and noticeable footprints even from far up as he was sitting. They were described as similar to a man, but much larger than anyone at the site, and pressed deep into the earth, as if whatever was walking through was very large and heavy. At first thought was that it must be a prank, but as he made his way around the site, asking all who worked there if they were to blame, a small crowd gathered around the prints in awe and curiosity. Some of them had their own stories about the creature who must have made these prints. Similar tracks were found at another job site he worked at for Wallace by the Mad River. Another person claimed to have seen tracks in Trinidad, a little ways up the coast, and in 1947, similar tracks were found on a work site for the Pacific Gas and Electric Company. So people were coming together like, no, like, my cousin worked for this company and they saw these. Shorty Wallace, so one of the brothers, suggested that the being that had made these tracks must also be responsible for the other strange things that had been happening at his sites. Just the summer before, a large heavy drum of diesel had gone missing with only large footprints left as evidence. It was eventually found at the bottom of a gully. Same for a 700-pound spare tire that was found thrust into a ditch. They thought at first it must be vandals, but now they were making connections with these prints. It had to be a creature so big and strong to carry out these deeds.
What did it want with the diesel?
I don't know, just annoyed with it being just nearby, I don't know.
Chunking it? Are they working out? What is the big tire? That's crazy.
I don't know. The men eventually did return to work, but the tracks stayed on their minds. They called him Bigfoot. Well, because he had a big foot. And the name really stuck.
Very creative, I must say.
Extremely. Stories told between loggers and their families made their way to the newspapers, and it seemed that many were beginning to take this seriously. So it kind of started out as like, haha, you're funny, Jerry. And then it was like, wait a second, this is getting weird. Some did admit to adding to the legend and lore with a few embellishments, but the stories took hold and caught the attention of locals and spread. The tracks couldn't be that of a bear, and witnesses just knew there was no way they could be fake. They were like, absolutely not. They looked so convincing. The hunt for Bigfoot began. Plaster casts were beginning to be made. There were plenty who didn't believe and thought it must be the work of pranksters on the site, but stories and the footprints prevailed. Bigfoot became a legend at this point. The loggers in the woods and some campers began to claim that they felt watched out in the trees, and many of their new work sites were littered with prints. Ray Wallace, one of the Wallace brothers, is said to have been the one that was responsible for the prints on his work sites. At the end of his life, some of his family members even found the wooden feet that he made to make the prints.
Okay, so you led us down that for what?
Because it made Bigfoot a sensation.
And he lied.
He did. Well, that's what his family said. I don't know if Ray Wallace admitted to it or if it, like, he died and his kids were like, yeah, Dad did this. He talked about it all the time.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly where that's from, but so is said Ray Wallace did it. Yeah. But since that time, countless people have claimed to find Bigfoot prints in the area along the northwest coast. So well after Ray passed. Even some rangers in the park have their hesitations at dismissing the legends outright. Bonnie Kent, a former volunteer with the BC Search and Rescue, worked out in the wilderness for 15 years. When she first began, she would roll her eyes at the prospect of a Sasquatch, but she heard so many tales from people who traveled here from all over the world, and her mind began to be swayed. Quote, "My first response was that people around here used to smoke too much and see big hairy guys. But out in the bush, there are a number of times where your hair stands up. There are areas that you just feel you're not supposed to be there." So the last story I'll tell today is one that is extremely controversial and has been contested by many, but it remains a mystery. No one has admitted to falsifying these things.
Before you tell me, do you believe it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know any of this. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm just so on the fence. In October of 1967, Roger Patterson and Bob Giblin went out on search near Bluff Creek to see Bigfoot for themselves. So Bluff Creek is the area where the work site was. The two friends rode their horses to the site that they thought best to capture proof of the creature. But by 1 p.m. that afternoon, the two men's horses began to kick. That's when the men saw it, a large fur-covered creature traipsing through the trees on two legs a mere 100 feet away. They grabbed their camera and began to capture one of the most famous pieces of evidence in Bigfoot research. The film shows the creature walking across and even at one point seems to look back at the two men as it makes its way back into the trees. There are many who deem it to be the most convincing proof of the creature's existence, but others think it to be a giant hoax. There have been plenty of people who have tried to claim it must be a person dressed in a costume, while others have scrutinized its shape and walk to deem it impossible to be a human's movements. The two men have never wavered on their account of what happened all those years ago. One of them has passed, and he never ever said, "No, we faked it."
See, that makes me believe it more because I just feel like a normal person with a normal conscience would have to be like, okay, like, I think I'm gonna die, or like, let me leave like a note or something. Hey, we made this up, guys. Haha, gotcha.
Yeah. Well, some people have come forward and said, I sold them the costume, but that has never been found to be true. And some people have come forward and said, yeah, I'm the guy they hired. I'm this big burly man they hired to put on the costume and walk for them.
Yeah.
But again, not proven to be true. Skeptics say that they did it to make money. Some people say that's definitely a dude in a suit.
Yeah.
And some people say, no, like humans don't walk that way. The swing of its arms, how long its arms are, the gait just doesn't seem human.
I don't know. I want to believe it.
And see, I said a note for later. Some people call that Bigfoot Patty.
Oh.
Because they believe that it has breasts and it's a woman. Bigfoot.
Oh, okay.
But that's just what some people say. I don't know.
I just find it really interesting that after all these years, they wouldn't have come forward and been like, hey, gotcha. Also because if it was like a little like trying to make money, like a cash grab, he could come out with like a little tell-all book or even put up like a YouTube video and be like the truth about the thing. And he could make money that way. So
that's true.
If he wanted to just come clean and tell the truth, he could make a lot of money.
Yep.
So I'd believe it.
Yeah.
I think.
It's out there for me. I'm on the fence with that one as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I saw other videos. So you can find other videos on YouTube of people, and some of them are a little convincing.
Really?
Some of them. Well, there have been plenty of attempts at proving the existence of Bigfoot, including the testing done on the Pangboche hand. Boche? I hope I'm saying that right. There have been countless blurry photos, intriguing videos, casts of footprints, hair, and scat collected, but none of the physical evidence has ever been convincing enough for the scientific community as a whole. People continue to keep track of the sightings though. One such site you can use if you have an encounter, if you'd like to just like read on some of the encounters, is the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, or BFRO, their website. Since the 90s, they've been keeping track of as many credible sightings and encounters as possible. So they take in hundreds of encounters like every day, and they rate them on credibility.
Yeah.
Like if someone just sends in like, oh, I saw Bigfoot on a hike. Yeah. They're not going to put that out there, but like they have to have credible information and they'll rank them.
Yeah.
Like this one's like I don't remember their ranking system, but like this one gets an A+ because this is very believable kind of thing. There's one more recording that was documented in the 70s called the Sierra Sound recordings that have many convinced of the presence of a large creature in the mountains along the west coast as well. Between the years of 1972 and 1975, Alan Barry, Ronald Moorhead, and their crew went into the Sierra Nevada mountains in search of their own evidence. They captured a total of 90 minutes of sound that they believed is a Bigfoot shouting out either at them or speaking in its own language to its community. Some people take this as the Bigfoot language. Like this is the community's language. The two men, even until Barry's death in 2012, have stuck by their assertions that the tapes are real and they captured the communication of the creature. I can show you that as well if you'd like.
I would love to.
And it goes on, but
I'll put the link in the description for that.
yeah.
I don't know why it kind of scared me.
It kind of sounds like
Monkeys.
a little bit. So I don't know. Again, I'm on the fence.
But Bigfoot also kind of resembles like a monkey, a gorilla creature.
Yeah. And we'll get into theories in a minute too. Many of the pieces of evidence collected either don't ever get tested to prove their authenticity, and it seems that those that do usually end up like belonging to another animal. And even in some cases, the data and study just get lost completely. The FBI, though, did take part in one of these inquiries surrounding the authenticity of collections of hair believed to belong to the elusive creature. In 1976, Bigfoot researcher and director of the Bigfoot Information Center and Exhibition in Dallas, Oregon, Peter Byrne, so the same guy from earlier, sent the FBI 15 hairs attached to a small piece of skin for analysis. It was revealed in 2019 when documents were released and declassified that the FBI did take it seriously and test the hairs. Jay Cochran Jr., the assistant director of the FBI Scientific and Technical Services Division at the time, wrote to Peter that they were typically in the business of testing for crimes committed, so they didn't usually do this, but decided to make an exception in this case. I don't know if he had a particular interest or just Peter was very convincing. Not sure. The hairs ended up belonging to the deer family, but I find it intriguing that the FBI would even entertain the possibility.
I do too, because there's a lot more things, like more important things that they could be looking into.
Yes.
So did they really believe it? And they want proof themselves.
Maybe so. In 2013, an Oxford geneticist named Brian Sykes asked worldwide for Yeti believers to send their evidence in for testing. 57 samples of hair, teeth, tissue, and other biological matter that the collectors believed could belong to a Yeti. Of those 57, 36 were deemed good enough for DNA testing. So some of them were too degraded, he couldn't do anything with it. They were compared to the genomes of other animals stored in their databases and found that most of them belonged to well-known animals like cows, horses, bears, goats, that kind of thing. But there were two samples, one from Bhutan and one from India, that he said were a match to a Pleistocene polar bear that lived 40 to 120,000 years ago. He believed the sample could have been some kind of hybrid between a polar bear and a brown bear, a Himalayan brown bear. Two other scientists conducted a reanalysis and found that they actually belonged to a rare Himalayan brown bear. So there's a Himalayan brown bear that's very rare, not seen very much. I don't know how many are actually remain in the Himalayas, but they said this is what it belongs to. And many people believe that the supposed sightings of a Yeti in the Himalayan mountains must actually be sightings of this type of brown bear, because bears do stand on hind legs sometimes.
They do. But do they walk for that long on their hind legs?
That's the thing. I don't think so. I don't think they're walking like 100 yards on hind legs, just in the middle of barren snow.
I mean, they could, I guess.
In theory. Many naysayers believe the evidence presented by believers just isn't enough. That the physical evidence could point to a number of other things, mostly hoaxes or animals. But there are plenty of people who hold steady in their beliefs and have created communities around it. There are Bigfoot searching expeditions you can join, Reddit pages, clubs, they hold events. Like there's a whole like Sasquatch 2-day event in British Columbia with like some of the native tribes get together and have their whole thing. I'm pretty sure the Sta'alis tribes have like the Sasquatch on their, like one of their symbols.
Really?
Yeah, it's like a whole big thing, especially in the Northwest. So these clubs and stuff like the BFRO and stuff list common signs of a Bigfoot encounter. So obviously the footprints are a dead giveaway that they may be in the vicinity, but many besides Barry and Moorhead have claimed to hear the creature or creatures making vocalizations out in the wilderness. But most sounds are described as guttural growls, high-pitched howls, ape-like whooping calls, and the sounds of tree knocking or wood knocking. So some people say that when people like you hear a bunch of like wood knocking in the woods out where Bigfoot is, it could be Bigfoots talking to each other.
Oh,
like indicating
like Morse
things.
Code type.
I guess so. Yeah.
So they're like intelligent.
If this is true, yes. Many people believe that if you come across strange tree structures in the woods, it could be a sign of a habitat or at least the former presence of the creature in the area. Things like trees splintering in an unnatural way, bent saplings and branches, and even large trees broken that seem like they come from an immense force, like a whole tree just snapped, like a log. Yeah. People have claimed to collect dark and distinctly textured hair that belong to the creatures. So sometimes they'll collect hair and they're like, this must be a Bigfoot hair. Who knows? And lastly, some scratches and gouges in trees, rocks placed in unnatural places, and bones being scattered in deliberate ways could be a sign that a Bigfoot is marking its territory for other animals or even other Bigfoot, maybe. One thing I found scary is that many people who experience what they believe is a Bigfoot encounter claim to hear heavy footsteps walking in tandem with them through the woods. So they'll be hiking and hear heavy footfalls that go when they go and stop when they stop.
I hate that.
And so
a lot.
It could be a predator of some kind, but a lot of people associate that with Bigfoot too.
But what if they're just observing us? Like, I just am in the camp and I want to believe that they're mostly good and they're just maybe like docile, and when they see people, one, they're
just curious.
on alert, but two, maybe they're just studying.
A lot of people do think that they are just more curious than they are territorial aggressive.
I would hope so.
Because, like I said, most encounters are not vicious and
Mhm.
violent. Most encounters are just kind of like,
We
"Hey,
saw it.
I saw a Bigfoot."
Yeah.
Yeah. Last section here. There are plenty of theories out there as to what exactly Bigfoot could be. There's a general consensus that believers fall under a few different categories. It could all be a manifestation of people's fear of the wild. Maybe they truly are misidentifying bears out there in the woods. Like, they're just afraid. They're just kind of making things up. They heard a story of Bigfoot and now they're afraid and it's Bigfoot. There are people who believe that it is some unknown species of animal that is ape-like. Some believe that it could be a descendant of an animal from Asia that shares a common ancestor with the modern orangutan, like 10 to 12 million years ago, like that they branched off. The animal was called the Gigantopithecus Blacki. It was a hair-covered ape that was extremely large, walked upright as humans do, and could have crossed over the Bering Strait many, many years ago. So just like people came across the Bering Strait, it too could have followed suit.
I mean, yeah, it could be just that. I am sort of in the camp that it is just like an animal that we haven't really got to mess with yet or see.
Yeah,
Maybe they just like to hide. They're shy.
Possible. My only reservation for that is I feel like we would have had remains found.
But what if the type of animal, because maybe
Like
they're
they bury
like
their...
advanced and
Yeah.
that maybe they do something with the remains.
That's what
you know?
some people say too, but I don't know. Like, sometimes people die just of natural causes on accident out in the wilderness. Do they always get to them? You know what I mean?
That's true.
I don't know. That's one reservation. I'm not saying that I don't believe. I'm not saying that I do. I'm just on the fence here. So could it be that the ancient legends are just sightings of this creature that died out long ago? The legends lived on long beyond the creature's existence. So, like, maybe they did cross over. Some tribes, ancient tribes, did see this creature and just passed along the legend, and it just grew from there as legend. Or maybe there is some kind of creature that remains who came from this creature many years ago. So it's kind of a branch off. The Giganto was first discovered in the 1930s by German-Dutch paleontologist G.H.R. von Koningswald. I'm so sorry. Who found an enormous molar being sold as a dragon's tooth in a Chinese drugstore. So it was a huge tooth. When it lived, it is believed to have been the largest primate, standing at 9.8 feet tall and weighing between 440 and 660 pounds. So, is it the Gigantopithecus? Is it a descendant of the Gigantopithecus? Is it a legend of the Gigantopithecus? I just like
Say it one more time.
Gigantopithecus.
I hate that. I don't know. That seems like the most logical thing for me.
Okay.
I think.
This is just me, but this next part is where I really get into it. There's also another theory described as the woo. So there are people who are wooers. There are it's like blood and fleshers, and then there are wooers, believers of Bigfoot.
Okay.
There are people who believe that Bigfoot or Sasquatch are a different being entirely. It is a being that can pass between the physical world and the spiritual world. This could explain why it can't be captured. There are plenty of native tribes who believe this to be so, that Bigfoot or Sasquatch is a spiritual being. Some believe it can cloak itself. Some believe it could read thoughts and memories and engage in telepathic communications. Some think it can immobilize people, heal them, shapeshift, and transform into orb or back into flesh and blood, rocks, trees, whatever. It is an in-between being, and it can use the spiritual world. This is what some, not all, some Native American tribes in the area and across the nation believe.
See, you kind of lost me there.
Okay, see, this is where I pick it up.
Really, this is where we differ. It's like, I like science. And
You're a flesh and blooder, and I'm a wooer.
Yeah, yeah. Think so.
There have been songs and stories passed down for generations to people of the First Nations tribes who believe this to be a possibility. Some believe that spotting this creature could be a blessing or a sign of good luck for yourself or your people. It means that you have been living by the rules of nature, in harmony with the land that they live on. There are some who also believe seeing him could be a sign of trouble, a sign that the lands are not being treated well. Could it be that all of those loggers cutting down ancient trees and destroying habitats weren't living by the agreement we all have with nature, and a sign that they were doing wrong?
Fern Gully.
Precisely. I'm pretty sure Fern Gully was set in like Northwest.
Exactly.
Loggers and stuff.
And honestly,
One of my favorite movies.
you've got me back.
I knew
You
I
lost
would.
me
I
and
knew
you brought
I'd,
me
I knew
back.
I'd reel you in with that.
Hmm.
So I'll leave you today with a few quotes from Native people and their beliefs about Sasquatch in North America. So this is from one of the articles that I read. A man named Matheson, I believe, was interviewing some people from First Nation tribes. So Joe, flying by Hunkpapa Lakota, said, quote, "I think the big man," so they called him a big man, some of them called him the big man, "is a kind of husband of the earth, who is wise in the way of anything with its own natural wisdom. Sometimes we say that this one is a kind of reptile from the ancient times who can take a big hairy form. I also think he can change into a coyote. So it's a shapeshifter of some kind. Some of the people who saw him did not respect what they were seeing, and they are already gone." Another quote, "There is your big man standing there, ever waiting, ever present, like the coming of a new day," said Oglala Lakota medicine man Pete Catches. "He is both spirit and real being, but he can also glide through the forest like a moose with big antlers, as though the trees weren't there. I know him as my brother. I want him to touch me, just a touch, a blessing, something I could bring home to my sons and grandchildren, that I was there and I approached him and he touched me." Another quote, "They exist in another dimension from us, but can appear in this dimension whenever they have a reason to. See, it's like there are many levels, many dimensions. When our time in this one is finished, we move on to the next, but the big man can go between. The big man comes from God. He's our big brother, kind of looks out for us. 2 years ago, we were going downhill, really self-destructive. We needed a sign to put us back on track, and that's why the big man appeared." So they had an encounter with him. So is it a sign from nature? Is it a spirit of the wood?
I am a flesh and wooer.
Okay,
I am
that
both.
works.
I am both.
I like that.
Because I don't know.
I'm on the fence. So if I am a flesh and blooder, I am of the belief that it is legend,
Mm-hmm.
and that it is just many
From
legends
the-
passed from long ago. Yeah.
Hmm.
Passed down when settlers came here. The natives told them, watch out for the big man, watch out for the hairy man, the wild man. And they were like, what? Is that so? Maybe. I don't know. But I am more of I like the idea that it can go between worlds.
I do too. So at the beginning of this episode, I was I was fully in, and now I'm sitting on the fence.
Okay. I'm sorry to have brought you out here with me. The next episode might change your mind, because it's just nothing but stories, and some of them are pretty convincing.
Okay. Well, I'm very excited.
Yeah, so let us know what you thought about this episode. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you hated every second of it, let us know.
Comment.
I'd love to know.
Tell me.
In a nice way, please. Leave an orangutan. Have we done that before?
We have, but let's do it again.
It fits. The Gigantopithecus.
If you believe it is more of a legend,
If you're flesh and blooder,
leave an orangutan. If you believe that is more spiritual and like what the natives say, leave
a sparkle.
a sparkle. I was going to say a sparkle. So orangutans versus sparkles, let us know.
I really am interested to see what people think.
I am too. I'm going to be looking at the comments for this one.
For sure.
So
So if you like this video, please like it, share it with your friends if you feel compelled to do so, and subscribe for more. Don't forget to come back next week. If you subscribe, you'll know to come back to part 2, just Bigfoot encounters. I'm going all in.
I'm very excited.
Very fun. If you're on audio, give us 5 stars. That would be greatly appreciated. And if you'd like to follow along with what we're doing, you can go to Ghosteas Pod at Ghosteas Pod on Instagram and TikTok. We post over there sometimes too. If you're interested, we do have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/ghosties. It's really fun. We have a fun episode at the beginning of this month, and we're putting all of our loose leaves. They're very wild, weird takes,
But they're fun.
It's a lot of fun. So you can go on over there. It's $5 a month.
And we're going to have a live coming up. So
Oh yeah, this weekend.
if you would like to get on Patreon,
If you'd like to get on board, we're doing a live this weekend.
we'll see ya. But other than that, come back on Monday. Or no, come back on Thursday.
I'm back on Thursday.
And then come back on Monday.
Yes, for more Bigfoot.
Goodness. Okay.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.